And I define strategy as 3 words: future, competitive advantage. So try to understand what your customers will need in the future, or what their customers will require in the future. You need to understand who you will be competing with in the future.
Welcome to the DesignRush Podcast. I'm your host, Kia Johnson. Today we're joined by Rishad Tobaccowala, a strategist who has spent decades advising brands like Amazon, Google, and Delta on redefining strategy, upgrading leadership capabilities, and preparing organizations for market shifts before they happen. Rishad is a former Chief Growth Officer at Publicis Groupe and best-selling author of Restoring the Soul of Business and Rethinking Work. In episode 87 of the DesignRush podcast, Rishad outlines 5 critical moves leaders must make to stay competitive and relevant in 2025. With nearly half of today's S&P 500 expected to be replaced within the next decade due to outdated strategies like clinging to legacy products instead of innovating, the risk of collapse has never been higher. Rishad shares exactly how companies must rethink strategy, leadership, and growth to survive what's coming. If you're a CEO, founder, or business leader preparing for the future, you don't want to miss this conversation. Watch the episode on YouTube, listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Got a story worth sharing? Email us at spotlight@designrush.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe for the best industry insights. Looking to your background, Rishad, you've worked with top-tier companies like Amazon, Google, and Delta. I mean, you've helped them drive growth during challenging times. What has been the most rewarding project that you've led in the past few years? And what would you say the impact it had, or what was the impact that it did have on business performance?
I think the single biggest thing that I probably did, which was most impactful, was actually for my own company, which is the Publicis Group, working with the leader to transition ourselves from being an advertising and communication company to a business and marketing transformation company. That required us to basically do $10 billion of acquisitions, reorganize our entire company, change our focus markets. And as a result, over the last 10 years, we ended up having twice the market cap of our next 2 competitors combined. And this meant that we actually had created a company that met our clients' requirements. So by redefining us and our services, we helped all our clients.
Oh, that's fantastic. Now, what would you say was actually the biggest challenge that you faced during this project? And how would you say you overcame that?
The biggest challenge in any transformation project is people. Everything is easy, but people get in the way. Most companies make a mistake thinking that the future of their business is a strategy deck, an M&A plan, and reorganization. It is not. It is about how you make sure that people are aligned, that people are incented, and people are trained for the future. And almost every company forgets that. Every company forgets that. It's basically a bunch of people in boardrooms sharing decks with each other. 95% of the company doesn't actually care how well the company does. They care how well they do.
What would you say separates businesses that thrive from those that struggle in times of change? I mean, you're speaking about people being the important factor here. Is there anything else that you would say, does separate businesses that thrive from those that struggle?
Businesses that thrive tend to basically have great cultures, and cultures is not a spa. Often when people tell you that, hey, we've got a great culture, we got foosball tables and we wash your clothes and all that stuff, I say that's a cult. That's not a culture. Because when you go to a spa, you actually pay them. They don't pay you. When you go to work, they pay you. Therefore, you need to get things done. And cults basically require compounds, because without compounds, they don't have Kool-Aid. You need to have Jonestown. Culture is very different. It's got nothing to do with the place. It's got nothing to do with the space. Culture are 4 things, and these things define future thinking companies. 1 is a quest for excellence. Excellent products, excellent talent, excellent financial results. 2nd is a growth mindset, continuous growth. 3rd is collaborative, both inside and outside the company. No company can do it all. Any company that claims that can do it all, including Apple, which is making a mess of itself right now because they think they know how to do AI, which they don't. They know how to do hardware. And the last and most important is open and honest communication. In my first book, which is called Restoring the Soul of Business, The favorite chapter of most people is called the turd on the table. In too many companies, we sit around a table, there's something brown and moist, we pretend it's a brownie when it's actually a piece of shit and nobody says so. So those are the four: a quest for excellence, growth mindset, collaboration, and open and honest communication. You don't have that, it doesn't matter what your strategy deck is, what your CEO says, or how much money you have. You will lose.
You will lose. Oh, I'm hearing you. I want to actually just find out from you if you maybe have a specific example of a company that successfully navigated change and then saw like a significant impact on profitability.
Absolutely. There are many, many companies. I'm going to give you two examples from two completely different parts of the world or two different industries. One very well known is how over the last 10 years, Satya Nadella has turned around Microsoft. And what he basically did is he went from basically them seeing the entire world. As he basically said, we're going to go from a know-it-all mindset to a learning mindset. But what it required was he decided to move away from a Windows focus. There's no more Windows operating division. He went from an incestuous internal focus to open partner, including with companies like OpenAI, buying things like GitHub, which is sort of Linux operating system. He basically decided to partner with everybody, including Meta on Horizon and everything else. And most importantly, he basically invested deeply in upgrading their talent and providing training. Their stock price therefore went up 10 times in 10 years. Now moving to the pizza business, a company that reinvented itself was Domino's Pizza. They basically decided that the pizza sucks. They put out an ad saying their pizza sucked. They were going to improve their pizza. Then they decided they were not just a pizza company, but a pizza logistics and delivery company. They created a world-class app, and they decided, why are we only delivering pizza to people's home? We should be delivering it to their phone. If you had invested in Domino's, you would have done better 10 years ago investing in Domino's than in Apple, Google, or Meta.
If you had to create a playbook for executives that are looking to maximize profitability in 2025, what would you say would be the 5 key strategies that we need to focus on, or that they need to focus on? Yeah.
The first is basically to have a strategy, and I define strategy as 3 words: future competitive advantage. So try to understand what your customers will need in the future or what their customers will require in the future. You need to understand who you will be competing with in the future. And against those future customer needs and future competitors, what advantage will you provide? So the first is having a strategy that's forward-thinking. Most people basically create strategies that are backward-thinking. So the entire automobile category kept thinking backwards, and therefore they got completely disrupted by Uber and Tesla. Because Uber and Tesla were asking questions about, is the future software, is the future electric, do you actually need to own a car? So one is make sure that your strategy is not your existing strategy, is future competitive advantage, it's not existing competitive advantage. So that's the first thing you should do. The second thing that you need to do is basically be aware that in all likelihood, where you want to go, you don't have all the skill sets. You're going to have to upgrade or bring in new skills, including you may have to bring in new skills to actually be your boss. Because if the world is moving from typewriters to word processors and you don't know code, you might need to figure out how that goes, right? The third is invest deeply in people. A company does not transform, people transform. A company does not grow, people grow, right? The fourth is find absolutely amazing partners, suppliers, and networks. Because in the world that we're moving to, most of the work, most of the talent, and most of the value will be added outside the company versus inside the company. And fifth, as leaders, do not take yourself too seriously and recognize that because you are senior, you're hanging out with other senior people. People don't tell you the truth, and you start to believe that your flatulence smells like Chanel 5, and it does not.
So you started out with the first strategy you mentioned, have a strategy, right?
Yeah.
That's where you start. Future competitive advantage. And you mentioned a couple of key factors around that. So what would you say then is the biggest mistake that companies make when they're trying to execute, and how can they course correct?
Yeah, so what basically the disadvantages always are that if you find a common theme among companies that do not succeed, is they have decided to defeat themselves. So I often go to boards and I say, no one can beat you or your company unless you decide to do it yourselves. And you'll see that most countries, most companies, and most leaders eventually defeat themselves. And why do they do that? They're very simple. There are three reasons they do that. One is they overreach. It was like Napoleon opened up a Russian front. So you try to basically do too many things and then you stop doing, you lose focus. That's one thing. The second is you do not take the outsider or the underdog seriously. Just like Gillette did not take Dollar Shave Club till they lost 17 share points to Dollar Shave Club and to Harry's, etc. So you basically says, I am the king or I am the queen, and who are these paupers? And I say, just remember in a revolution, yes, a lot of paupers die, but the king and queen's head is in the guillotine. Okay. The fourth is not investing in talent and believing that talent just grows by itself without growth, investment, and aligning the right incentives. That's, I think, the fifth and last one is aligning the right incentives. If you want to basically become a multimedia company and you keep paying people to sell magazine pages, you'll end up as Condé Nast. Okay? Which is an incredible company with incredible leadership who knew exactly where the future was going, but they basically did not make the hard decisions, both with leadership or incentive plan, and they kept trying to be a magazine company long after it was gone, because they incentivized people to sell magazine pages, though they knew the future was multimedia.
You were mentioning a couple of these key points right now. The first actionable step that companies should take to implement this, like if you were to say this is the exact pinpoint of a starting, actionable step that companies should take, what would you say it would be?
I would say the very first thing is to truly try to understand what advantage are you going to provide to your customers versus other competitors. So people say, I want to sell this. So I said, okay, first of all, does any of your customers want this thing that you want to sell? I understand you want to sell it, but does anybody want to do it? Second is, why is it better than their other choices? Right? And the better has to be actually tangible, not, I have an interesting brand. No world-class brand is built just on it's smoke and mirrors. They always have some edge, or they in some place, and then they build that out. Apple is a great brand, Hermes is a great brand, Costco is a great brand, and all they're very differently priced because they actually have something fundamental besides anything else, right? And then, so my whole basic belief is, I want to sell this thing. Well, why is it better? Who the hell wants it? Okay, that's the key thing. And by the way, why is it continuing to be better? And do people still want it? That's the key thing to always ask.
So in terms of your second strategy, you were talking about, be aware that it's almost like don't have that sort of do all. You have to actually upskill as well. You kind of went into that a little bit. Now, in terms of that strategy, why would you say that actually is so essential for revenue growth?
Well, the reason it is because we are now especially moving to an age of AI, where two things are going to happen. All knowledge is going to be free, which basically means experience is going to matter less and less, but expertise is going to matter more and more, right? At the very same time, the half-life of any skill is declining really fast. So I've always basically said, as a leader, if you're not spending an hour a day learning, you're just proving to me that you want to be irrelevant. And I say this to leaders. You have all these meetings. Kick out one of those meetings and spend an hour learning. Get somebody to teach you, read something, go figure it out, use something. It's amazing how many leaders are talking about AI and they don't use it. What are you talking about? Right? Because if you really understood it, you'd basically understand that your entire business model potentially is not just going to be made more efficient and more effective, but the entire business model might be disrupted. As I remind people, if the New York Times had decided that digital technology would make their printing presses work faster and their trucks have better routes, they wouldn't be the New York Times that they are. What they began to understand what digital technology did wasn't just going to make things efficient and effective. but it would basically create existential risk and existential opportunities. Digital technologies basically said you don't need printing presses or trucks. It's not a question of making printing presses and trucks. So too many people are thinking about AI as how to make things more efficient and effective. I believe AI is going to disrupt your complete business model. And if you aren't learning, you're going to get disrupted. And nobody cares. Technology does not care about your strategy, your status, or your press releases.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I feel as if strategy 2 and strategy 3, which is investing in people, kind of like ties in together.
It is, because my whole stuff is the future competitive advantage thing becomes extremely important as strategy 1, or where do you want to go, right? What products or services are you trying to do? Number 2 is making sure that you as a leader understand your category and understand your skill set. But then that basically sets the vision and the direction. But you actually have to land the plane, right? So you say, okay, I've got a plane and I need to basically land it at this airport. But now you need pilots and co-pilots and engineers. And if you have not trained them and they have been learned how to operate trains, they'll try to land the plane on a train track, which doesn't make any sense, right? And so that's the third part of it. And therefore they are connected, which is the second one really says, leaders, you better improve yourself. And the third one says, your talent better be improved. Or, toward or sort of incented. And I always go in and I say, where's your training program? Well, we don't have any money for the training program. So I said, okay, then forget about it. You've lost before you started. I don't understand what all these consultant decks are all about.
Do you have any other sort of key indicators that companies should look out for to understand that they are actually executing these correctly?
Yeah, so there are 2 of them. So one is obviously you have all these revenue and other dashboards.
Yeah.
But there were 3 criteria that I always would measure. One was an obvious one that people do, which is Net Promoter Score. Will your customers recommend you? Because that basically says, okay, are you satisfying them, right? The second and third are less obvious. The second one is Net Employee Promoter Score. Are your employees happy? So in companies like Starbucks, what goes wrong is not, I don't think it's the store or the quality of the coffee. It's basically the baristas are overwhelmed and unhappy. Okay? And as a result, the product and service begins to suffer. So my basic belief is I care more about employee joy than customer joy. Because the reality of it, if I have employee joy, and again, I'm not running a spa, those are the employees who will service my customers, come up with the ideas, solve the problems, right? And you can't be no better than your employees. So that's the second thing. So one is, I would obviously look at Net Promoter Scores for for customers. I would look at employee joy or employee promoter scores. And here's the third one. I would then say, looking at my revenue number and seeing my revenue number is doing fine and my profitability numbers are doing fine, I would ask, should I be looking somewhere where somebody is doing something in my category which is potentially very disruptive but isn't showing up in my revenue numbers, right? Or is it that the next thing that I do will actually hurt my revenue numbers? So I'll give you an idea. The entire search marketing world did not come from the Fortune 500 companies, right? So even today, if you look at where most of Google or Meta's revenue is, they're from small and medium businesses, right? And so when I was running large parts of Publicis, I was early in a lot of things, but I was 6 months late on search. So we had to buy search. In most other cases, we created our own and then added capabilities. But this was a more expensive thing. We had to go buy a company because I realized, oh my God, we've fallen behind. We have to pay for something. And then I sort of asked myself, why did I fall behind? Besides, I'm usually stupid anyway, but why was it this time I had fallen behind? And that's because I was paying a lot of attention to my clients, and I was paying a lot of attention to my revenue and profitability, all of which were good. My clients were happy, revenue was good, profitability was happy. And so I didn't care. But what was basically happening is my big clients had advertising budgets, and the people who were using search had little to no advertising budgets. And so what began to happen is an entire new industry was formed, and it became big, and then started being very important to my clients. And if I'd only paid attention to my clients, by the time they decided search was important, I would not have had any capabilities, and they would have switched companies. Similarly, sometimes you want to see your revenue go down versus if your revenue keeps going up and your profitability keeps going up, it's an indication of either a very good business or you're about to be disrupted. As Jeff Bezos basically said, your margin is my opportunity. Okay? And usually what tends to happen is when your revenue is growing pretty good, when your margins are growing even better, an indication might be that you are in an industry where the industry has stopped innovating and you're now getting the benefits of scale without innovation. And then you have to disrupt. So I'll give you a very simple example of a company that stopped looking at their dashboards and did this other thing. And that company was Adobe. So Adobe was doing very well. And then the CEO of Adobe, Shantanu Narayan, said, instead of selling packaged software, I'm going to basically sell subscriptions. Instead of focusing only on Adobe as a creative company, I'm going to try to make it into a marketing company. And I'm going to buy things like Omniture and other types of companies. That combination of things significantly reduced his stock price from, I think it used to be, I don't know, $80 or $60, $70, and it went down to like $20 or $25. And then once he had the new model, it went up to $350. Okay? But in effect, he went anti-dashboard. He says, I have to disrupt myself because I'm beginning to see that future distribution will be in the cloud and future distribution will be different. So, in effect, sometimes when you see your metrics going very positive, it may mean you're ripe for disruption. And sometimes sometimes when your metrics are not so good, it doesn't mean you don't have a good business. It means you're investing in change.
Thank you so much for sharing. I want to get back to the strategies here. But strategy number 4, you mentioned find amazing partners and networks. So my question to you is, with that strategy, I mean that it's fantastic, but I'm sure there's a lot of challenges, right? That companies would face.
There are a lot of challenges. There are 3 very, very big challenges. So challenge number 1 is we all would like to keep all the money we get and do everything in-house, because if you do everything in-house, you don't have to share any of your revenue with anybody. If you do everything in-house, you control everybody. And if you do everything in-house, you aren't necessarily fueling a potential competitor. Okay? So if you notice, IBM used Microsoft MS-DOS and gave birth to a Microsoft, who then came and ate IBM. Because they just thought software was not so important compared to hardware, right? So a lot of people basically say, why do we want to share our revenue? Why do we want to potentially create a competitor? And why do we want to lose control of the ecosystem? So it's difficult. But what has tended to basically happen is if you decide to do everything yourself, and up to now, one of the few companies that's done that has been Apple. And it has not hurt them for quite some time, and it's now about to hurt them really badly, really badly. There's this amazing piece that a gentleman called John Gruber has written, and people can search for it by checking Daring Fireball. That's his blog, Daring Fireball. And his piece is called Something is Rotten in the State of Cupertino. Okay? Or Something is Rotten in Cupertino, something like that. Which basically shows that increasingly Apple is releasing fake vaporware products, which only Microsoft used to do. That all their AI announcements are not about real products or services. Okay? And it's one of the most amazing takedowns. And that's primarily because they think they can do AI themselves and they can't. They should just be basically a hardware and design company. They're not a world-class software company. And when you have these changes, so the first is if you don't have a partner, you lose focus, right? Second, if you don't have a partner, you lose speed because you have to now create everything that already exists. And third, if you don't have a partner, you potentially lose your customer because in effect, they will go to people who provide the best products and services, connected products and services. And the reality of it is what you need to basically do is get there in a very simple way, which is number one, figure out what are your key competitive advantages and say, okay, those are things we're going to keep in-house or we're going to keep control over, right? But to do delivery to our clients, we're also going to require agility, which is speed, cost competitiveness, which is sometimes you get by not doing it necessarily all in-house. Sometimes you do get it by doing in-house. And third is you eventually need world-class quality. And if you can manage your customers properly, you can do stuff. Now, you got to remember, even someone like Apple, right? They design their own silicon, but that is made in Taiwan by Taiwan Semiconductor. All most of their phones are made either in China by Foxconn, in China, or in India by Foxconn, who's opened up in India. Okay. So in effect, they design, but every other part is manufactured outside by other people. So they already themselves are not a very internal focused company. So even when you say Apple, what Apple does is it wants to control the entire product stack, but not the manufacturing stack. But unfortunately, now they don't know how to do AI software. So that product stack is beginning to come into a result. And in fact, they don't know how to do it so well that I'm not sure they even know what state of the art is. If you see some of the things that they do, it's so bad. My whole stuff is have they even seen other things. Like they have this thing called Playground. It's so bad compared to Mid-Journey that my whole stuff is, have you ever seen Mid-Journey, right? Have you seen Grok 3, right? Have you seen the latest Gemini? Or what are you doing? And that is one of the biggest reasons why you want to go outside is, one of the reasons why in most communities and societies, they don't allow you to marry your cousin, okay, is primarily because it gives rise to problems with the children. Incest doesn't allow for diversity of a gene pool, right? So it allows for some problem. Well, if you do everything internally, it's incestuous ideas, right? So, or the incestuous everything. So what I always say is incestuous things give rise to bastard ideas, which are bad ideas, okay? And that is why you have to do this from an outside. I'm not saying you outsource everything, but the reality of it is you're not going to basically be world-class, focused, speedy, agile, and cost competitive by saying, I, me, mine, it's all, we're going to do it ourselves. It's not going to happen. And not in the world that, like in my new book, Rethinking Work, I think most organizations will do most of their work outside. Most of their employees will be outside.
I mean, if you think about it, just having amazing, partners and networks, which also help you in terms of just accountability, to yourself.
Yes, because they hold you responsible, but also to a great extent, yes, in one way you can say they are potentially taking away some revenue, but at the same stage, they actually drive your revenue because in effect you have a better product or service. Exactly. And in many cases, even like I work with a lot of different people, so I do lots of different things. And people say you're investing a lot in them and their own businesses. I said, yeah, because we help each other. So they drive me revenue, I drive them revenue because I said, okay, this thing you do really well, you should handle this. And they say, well, you do this really well, you should handle this. Or, hey, this thing both of us can do together. So let's do it together, right? And those things become very, very important.
Yeah, very, very true. You were touching a little bit on, a couple of ways in which to measure. But I want to find out from you, if there are any key metrics that executives can actually track to ensure that they're getting the most out of the strategies that you've been mentioning.
There are. And one of the things, but those metrics sort of tend to change, right? So I'll give you an idea. So what I'm going to do, so in my most recent book, Rethinking Work, right, I have an entire chapter on how just the future of work means every CFO is going to have to change all their measurements. Okay. And what I want to basically say is that your measurements are never the same. So I'll give you an idea how it changes. And it's not about the future of work, right? So if you think about it, there are three things that people always measure. Cost, right? Productivity, and just financial management. So costs are things like, in the past, if you wanted to save on money, you would say, how do I downsize? How do I outsource? How do I do lean manufacturing? Okay. Or economies of scale. If you want to get productivity enhancements, you would say, how do I specialize? How do I train? How do I centralize? And then your financial dashboards would be tight budgets, etc. Now, you could say that in the future, the way you're going to measure costs is, how do you partner with digital platforms? How many of your employees should be remote workers? Right? So when I'm basically, so the same things, everybody basically measures three things: costs, productivity, and financial ratios. What I'm now saying is the way you get cost savings and the way you get productivity and the way you get financial ratios change when there's a change in the business. And so the dashboards have the broad measurements are the same. You need a business where you can understand cost, productivity, and financial ratios. But businesses make a wrong mistake by sometimes measuring the same wrong things. So one of the reasons why many media companies didn't make into the new digital world is they kept measuring digital media the same way they measured analog media. So in analog media, one of the things that was important was cost per thousand. But in digital media, it was cost per click. Okay? And so that's the reason in my new book on the future of work, I wrote an entire chapter for CFOs. Because my whole stuff is, you people think work is returning to the office. And my whole basic belief is I don't care whether people are 5 days in the office or 0 days in the office. It's got nothing to do with the future of work.
Exactly. Yeah. As long as the job's getting done.
Yeah. And by the way, even if you say you figured it out, ideally, let's suppose you're 0 days in the office because you think that's very futuristic. Okay. All right. Are you looking at anything? Do you have the rest of your financial ratios? Do you have your organizational structure right? Do you have your business model right? Are you investing in trading? Do you have a lot of... And one of the big things that most managers have to recognize is we are now seeing the age of debossification. Okay? So as I tell people, one of the reasons people don't want to return to the office is they don't want to return to you. Okay? It's not the space, it's you. Because you're monitoring, checking in, allocating, measuring, like just bothering the hell out of them, which they just didn't need. So I said, what a boss does is they run around doing those things with a zone of control. What a leader does is they basically do zone of influence. They build, they create, they mentor, they guide. Okay? And I said, this is basically about you changing, not your space. It's your mental space, not your physical space.
Definitely. You also spoke about the fifth strategy, which I'm very interested in, I have to be honest, where you said that as leaders, do not take yourself too seriously.
Yeah.
I'm loving that. I mean, it's sort of like, it's very open-ended, so it's kind of like, okay, where do we go with this, But if you can just kind of like expand on that a little bit more and unpack it for me, that'd be great.
So here's what basically happens is at some particular stage, it's human when you are very senior to believe that you are infallible. And there are lots of reasons. One is, look, you became senior because you were successful. So you could say, I'm the king of everything or queen of everything because I have now won the Game of Thrones and I'm here, right? So I'm sitting on the Iron Throne or whatever it is. So I'm sitting there. That's great. all the people around you are saying, you are fantastic. You're an amazing queen, amazing king. You're the most amazing person in the world. You're hanging out with other kings and queens who are saying, aren't we all so amazing? And everywhere you go is with pomp and circumstance. So you begin to believe, once you get enough of that feedback, that you are the coolest thing in the entire world, right? But today, especially because of modern technology, including AI technology, new ways of companies to scale, a lot of people who are the peasants now basically have a new slingshot. So I basically say modern technology is the slingshot that allows David to bring down Goliath. So while you are celebrating all of this, there are other people who are like outside the castle saying that we don't get enough to eat, and now we're going to storm the castle. And now we have a new way of storming the castle. So whenever people say, I have a business with a moat, I say, you don't have a business with a moat. You just have given me lots of water to flood your castle with. Right? That's the way to think. And what I remind people is I said, you need to always think like an immigrant. And then people say, like, but I'm not an immigrant. So I said, I understand that. But your mother or father was an immigrant. What most people don't realize is more than 50% of the United States population either are immigrants or their mother or father was an immigrant.
Exactly.
Okay? So the majority of this country is just they're just sitting there, right? So I said, okay, I'm not talking about illegal, legal. I'm just saying immigrant. Okay. And I said, what do immigrants do? They think like outsiders. What do immigrants do? They think like underdogs. Okay. And let's say, well, you might say, I refuse to acknowledge I'm an immigrant of any sort. So I say, okay, that's fine. We are all, including if you're Native American. We're all immigrants into the future. Right? And the future will surprise us. So guess what? Think like an outsider, think like an underdog. And that's the reason why you usually, as I said, I've given this slide to people, you as a leader in your company are not going to be defeated unless you decide to defeat yourself. And the reason you defeat yourself is you basically don't take your people seriously, you don't take new outsiders and the underdog seriously, you take yourself too seriously, and lo and behold, before you know it, you've got yourself at Enron, or you've got yourself anything else. And then the other thing that leaders have to recognize is there are certain things that leaders need to understand. And I've written recently about this because recently, right now, people are talking about things like masculine energy and hardcore. And my thing is that's the biggest bullshit I've heard in my entire life. Okay, it's complete crap. That nobody's even standing up telling them that it's complete crap. It tells me that we have a loss of leadership all over this country. Okay, because here's what happens. Here's what a leader does. A leader is basically about soft skills. What are those? Integrity, trust, patience, loyalty, principles, a backbone. So my whole stuff is, you think you're a leader when you got a backbone of a jujube and you're sitting on a marshmallow base, and you think you're screaming hardcore and masculine energy. You squishy little burrito boy of a thing. And you talk to these people and they fall apart because they just built on their own hot air. Right?
Yes.
And when somebody basically says, hey, smell your own fart, it doesn't smell like Chanel 5, they wake up.
Yes. I'm never buying Chanel 5 after this. Thank you, Rishad. Oh, gosh. So, Rishad, I just kind of want to tie off this part of the conversation. Looking at all the 5 strategies together that we've been discussing and unpacking, right? How should executives then prioritize them? Which should they act on first? Because you did give me the step as in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but is that literally where we're starting with number 1 is strategy?
Those are the 5 things strategically. What I would prioritize is individually their things that they need to do. If they do this following 3 things, they solve for those 5 things. So what I basically say is while you're solving for the company, solve for yourself too, please. Right? And so individually, when they ask me, like, how have you remained relevant over all these years? Okay. And I said, maybe I'm fooling people, but let's suppose I have remained relevant. What's the thing that needs to get done? And I said, it's not like because I've done it, it's any good. I've learned from the best people and I've said, here's what I've learned, and I'm copying them. Okay, that's the best way of thinking about it. So as a leader, or as anybody, and by the way, any individual is a leader. A boss is a title that's given to you. A leader is you can be a leader. You don't need people to follow, be reporting to you. So if for any leader, 3 things I would do is, number 1 is spend an hour a day learning. Okay, because that gives you a learning mindset. Second is once in a while, build a case for the exact opposite of what you think is true. That way you don't get yourself into this flatulence Chanel 5 problem. The third thing you want to basically do is ask yourself, are you really a leader? And so look at your calendar and say, are you spending at least 2 out of every 3 hours building, creating, convincing, making, guiding, mentoring? And less than 1 of every 3 hours checking and allocating, monitoring, measuring, and delegating. Right? So do more leader-like things than boss-like things. Occasionally question your own model and spend an hour a day learning. If you do that, in effect, those other 5 things are very possible.
Nice. Okay. I'm totally getting you. Rishad, I just want to shift our conversation a little bit right now, and I want to find out from you, what would you say is one quick win that companies can implement immediately to start seeing revenue growth in the next 3 to 6 months?
I think the quick win to see revenue growth is to identify your 3 biggest and your 3 smallest clients, and understand why your biggest clients are big and your smallest clients are small, and put the learnings from your biggest clients to your smallest clients.
Oh, I see.
That you've already solved it in your company, so you don't have to reinvent it because it's a fast 3 to 6 months. You just take those and apply them there.
That's actually a very, very, I love that. Again, you're just providing such a fresh perspective. And then in terms of just an example of a company that's implemented a small change and saw an outsized impact, do you have any to share, perhaps, that you can think of?
Well, I would say that a company that implemented a small change and saw a big impact, but it was a series of small changes, is the New York Times basically used to have what was known as a page 1 meeting, and they decided what would be news, and based on what would be page 1 of the newspaper, the physical newspaper. They then decided that page 1 was not the physical newspaper, it was the digital newspaper. Okay? Which meant they were no longer on a 24-hour, we will wait 24 hours before we publish a story. Right? They were no longer limited to page 1 being exactly X inches by Y inches. In a scrolling digital thing, page 1 is everything's page 1 potentially. Right? And then your mindset changes. What is page 1? So suddenly you're no longer limited by time or space. And just one key shift. Okay? That simple shift, it changed everything. So that gives you an example.
As a business leader, finding the right agency partner is very critical to achieving your business objectives. So when evaluating a potential agency partner, what would you say are the top qualities that you look for to ensure that they're actually the right fit for your business?
The first thing I would basically say is who's going to be working on my business and how long have they worked on the company? Okay. I don't care about who comes to pitch my business, who's going to work on my business and how long have they been working on the company, right? So you want to make sure you have the best talent you possibly can, who you are aligned and connected with. That's number 1. Number 2 is, can you give me an example? Because every company wants to basically reinvent themselves, transform themselves, right? How have you as a company done that to yourself? So are you eating your own dog food? Right? And the third is, can you give me a vision for my business 3 years out? Those are the 3 things I would ask. I would not worry about fees and all this other bullshit, because the reality of it is, if you get yourself a partner, whether you pay them 10 or 20% more makes no difference. And if the reality of it is, if that makes a big difference, then you don't even have a good business. Okay. And so what I basically do is I go out of my way to get the world's best people. I don't care how much I pay them, because I basically end up with such massive returns to the greatest people, because there's no almost upside. I mean, no downside, there's only upside. But the reality simply is, people basically, as I say, if you buy a cheap pig, you'll get a poisoned hot dog. So think outcomes. Too much of this industry thinks input.
Outcomes. Yeah, definitely.
So hopefully that helps.
It definitely does.
Great.
Rishad, I've got my last question to you right now. If you could sit down with any business leader right now to discuss the future of profitability, who would it be and why?
I would basically, sit down today with someone like a Jeff Bezos, because he has figured out how to basically be profitable enough to grow really interestingly, but not be so profitable that he's been attacked. This is when he was running at Amazon, if that makes sense. And then ask him, now that he's the underdog with Blue Origin versus SpaceX, what's he thinking about?
I like that. I was actually going to ask you the question you would pose to him.
Yeah. I would think about that, and I would also basically think about what does he think about the Washington Post, which is the other thing that he's running.
Yes.
So he's getting a lot of angst on the Washington Post, but in some ways what he's doing with the Washington Post is exactly what the Economist and the Financial Times opposition or the Wall Street Journal opposition does, right?
Yeah.
Which is, I believe in free markets and I believe in liberal thinking, and I don't care about everything else.
There you go.
Perfect. All right.
Perfect. Rishad, thank you so much for joining us on
Welcome.
the show. It's been an absolute
You bet.
privilege to chat with you today. Thank you for sharing
Thank
your
you.
knowledge and expertise.
You bet.
Bye.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Curious what top brands look for when choosing an agency? Tune into our latest episodes where we reveal the decision-making secrets of leading brands. Subscribe to the DesignRush podcast and stay ahead of the competition.